Thanks to Square Enix for providing me a PS5 game code for this review. Hi everyone, Auntie Lexi here. So, many of you know that I'm not a huge fan of tactical RPGs. Compared to traditional turn-based JRPGs, battles in these games can drag on for sometimes 20 minutes or more. And out of all of the tactical RPGs ever made, none were more guilty of this than the original Final Fantasy Tactics. That game required a considerable amount of grinding to max out character and job levels, and with every animation forcibly playing at its own pace, plus a UI that often made even simple actions take longer than they should, the overall time commitment of the original could feel excessive, like it demanded more than many players were willing to give. On the other hand, those who stuck with it discovered something extraordinary. Hidden beneath the web of menus was a progression system with unprecedented depth, offering a level of customization the series hadn't seen up to that point. The tactical battles were highly engaging, constantly forcing you to adapt strategies you'd never consider in a traditional JRPG, like rallying around an objective instead of spreading your forces thin. And then there was the story, a tale of heartbreak and political intrigue that delivered meaningful character development without leaning into the kind of melodrama we often see in modern RPGs. For fans who persevered, Final Fantasy Tactics became a timeless classic, and they'll still swear by it to this day, as many of you remind me in the comments. These were likely the same thoughts that Kazutoyo Maehiro, an event planner on the original, and Hiroshi Minagawa, its art director, had when they decided to replay Final Fantasy Tactics 2 years ago. They recognized, as many of us do, that it was a timeless classic that deserved to be rediscovered by a new generation. But they also couldn't ignore the little things that made the original feel clunky by today's standards. Out of that reflection came Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles, a remake so thoughtful, it turned my usual reluctance toward the genre into late-night sessions obsessing over builds, grinding for job points, and falling headfirst into everything that makes Final Fantasy Tactics timeless. This sense of timelessness is reinforced by the game's framing device, a chronicle of the War of the Lions. It opens with the abduction of Princess Ivalice from the Arbonne Monastery by Delita Hyrule, widely considered the hero of this war, and introduces Ramza Baelv, a man seemingly removed from history, yet the very figure you control. The tale presents both the accepted record of events and an examination of how Ramza could have possibly been the true hero of the tale, a reminder that history isn't just what's written, but what's remembered. Before I dive into what made the Ivalice Chronicles finally click for me, I want to point out that the original PS1 version is also included here. It uses the War of the Lions localization, runs in widescreen, and even has auto-saving to make the experience smoother. Beyond that though, it's preserved just as you remember. Same balance, same pixel art, with much of the classic intact. Now, I know that some of you might be wondering if any of these new streamlining features take away from the original challenge. From my time with it, that's not the case. What they really do is cut out the busy work, and that makes the game feel less like a chore and more like something you want to keep coming back to. Because at the end of the day, just spending more time in a game doesn't always make it better, especially when that time is tied up in clunky systems and watching lengthy, unskippable animations. The Ivalice Chronicles manages to respect your time while still keeping the soul of the original intact. And if for some reason you're still worried the balance has shifted too far, the developers actually built in 3 difficulty modes. There's an easier option if you wish to focus on the story, a harder option if you feel like the new features smooth things out too much, and a middle option that's been rebalanced to keep the feel of the original while fixing some pain points. To me, all of these are valid ways to play, and that's the point. This remake doesn't lock you in into one vision of what Final Fantasy Tactics should be. It gives you the choice to experience it your way, whether that's through the original version or the enhanced one. One of the places you'll be spending most of your time in Final Fantasy Tactics is in battle. And in the enhanced version, those battles don't just feel faster, they give you more control. This is going to be the biggest part of the review, because while the changes may seem small at first, they add up in a way that makes you think, wow, I didn't know I needed this. And once you've played the game with them, it'll be tough to imagine going back. Let's start with one that completely changes the pace of battles, the new Fast Forward feature, which lets you speed through every single animation, including those summons. On the PS1, summons were painfully slow because the game had to load them off the disc each time, and then you still had to sit through long, unskippable animations. With the Fast Forward feature and today's hardware, that's no longer a problem. Thankfully, the game won't let you accidentally fast forward through important story scenes. Those will still play out in full. But incidental battle chatter does get skipped, and I really wish that Square Enix had given us the option to keep that in. Even with that caveat, this one feature alone makes grinding and experimenting feel less like a slog, and way more like something you can immerse yourself in, without feeling like the game is wasting your time. Like, battles that would normally take 20 plus minutes can be over in less than 10. Then there's Reset Move, which fixes one of the original's most frustrating quirks. In the original game, once you moved a unit to their new location, you are locked in, like dropping a chess piece. Personally, I've always preferred to move a character first, then check the range of their abilities, and tweak their position so they aren't at a disadvantage. Now, you can simply undo that move and pick a different spot, with one important exception. Certain movement-based abilities and actions, like the Monk's Recovery HP, can't be reset because of the perk they give. That's an understandable limit, but it doesn't change the bigger picture. Reset Move is essential because it not only helps with determining attack ranges, it also lets you make smarter positioning decisions overall, without being punished for experimenting. But perhaps one of my favorite new features has to be the retry battle option. In the original game, if you made a single mistake, you had to either see the entire battle through, or hope you saved before the fight. Now, if you realize the fight isn't going your way, you can pause, hit retry, and jump right back in. After hitting retry, you're even given the choice to either restart with the same units and formation, or regroup and switch things up. That's especially helpful when you're dropped into a fight with no idea what to expect. What I love most is how immediate it feels. You pause, hit retry, choose to start the battle over, and just like that, you're reset to the beginning, ready to refine your strategy and try a different approach without missing a beat. And that alone completely changes your approach to combat. Instead of dreading the punishment of wasting 30 whole minutes, you feel like you're given more freedom to take risks and learn from your mistakes faster. And if you don't want to restart the entire fight, the game now has your back with generous autosaves. You'll get one before a battle starts, but the real lifesaver is that it also creates multiple mid-battle autosaves along the way. And while you can't manually save during combat, you can load any of these autosaves whenever you need. That said, I would have loved it if they showed you exactly what turn you were on for each mid-battle autosave, because right now, the only way to tell is by the timestamp. And for anyone wondering why I'm making a big deal out of this, here's the lore. Whenever someone mentions online that they've started playing the original Final Fantasy Tactics, the first reply you'd always see was, "Save constantly, or you'll regret it." Compared to that, the difference here is night and day. I should also point out that the enhanced version has no rewind function, which has become a staple of many modern tactical RPGs. But that's okay. The autosaves make sure you always feel like you're making forward progress through a fight, instead of living with the old anxiety of wondering if you'd saved enough. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you'll hit a battle that just feels impossible, the kind where you realize you either need more levels, new jobs, or better gear. In enhanced mode, that's no big deal. Just pause the game and hit return to world map. And that same sense of control carries over outside of battle too. Those old, inescapable random battles that used to stop you dead, now you can simply flee from them. And if nothing pops up when you actually want to grind, you can just head straight to a battlefield and search enemies yourself. Each spot has enemies scaled to different levels, so you can fine-tune the challenge you're looking for, giving you the ability to sharpen your team on your own terms instead of waiting on luck. And that's the bigger picture here. The game hands you the freedom to decide how you want to play instead of locking you to a single path. And while I've been mostly talking about new battle features, the team also took the time to revisit the overall balance and AI, and I actually saw the difference firsthand. In one early battle in the classic version, the leader ran off and barely helped at all. In the enhanced version, that same fight played out differently. The leader pressed forward on the offensive, acting more like the character he's supposed to be. Beyond AI, abilities that were once ignored have been reworked so they're worth considering, but never to the point of breaking the game. The result is that you've got more tools to play with and more ways to express yourself, instead of just relying on the same tried-and-true spells and abilities. Combine that with the new difficulty options, and the remake feels like it adapts to how you want to play rather than forcing everyone into the same experience. And that philosophy doesn't stop with the mechanics. It carries through into how the game looks, sounds, and feels. The enhanced version also makes huge strides in UI, and it's all about clarity. The new job tree lays out exactly how jobs unlock, with level requirements clearly listed, so you can plan character progression without guesswork. Battles are easier to read too. A combat timeline shows whose turn is coming up. Prediction screens make it clear what each action will do, even down to highlighting what's blocking your line of sight if you're trying to throw a rock, so you can adjust your strategy on the fly. And if you're the kind of player who doesn't want to tinker with equipment, there's now an optimized gear option to automatically assign the best loadout for your units. On the other hand, if you love loadouts, you can now save job, gear, and ability sets to quickly swap between builds. And a new tactical view and more flexible camera controls make it much easier to see where everyone is and target the right tiles, something the original often struggled with. None of these changes alter the core gameplay, but they give you more knowledge and more tools to work with, which helps you make better decisions, take bigger risks, and feel confident that you can overcome whatever the game throws at you. All of that said, Final Fantasy Tactics is still a mechanically dense game. Its depth is exactly why fans adore it, but also why it's intimidated newcomers for so long. The job system alone can send you down a rabbit hole of builds, grinding, and experimentation. And the more time you put into it, the more rewarding it becomes. That's why these quality of life features matter so much. They don't erase the complexity, they make it approachable. Even the tutorials have been modernized and made easier to access through the new Chronicles feature. So instead of feeling like you're fighting against the game just to understand it, you're now encouraged to dive in and actually enjoy learning its systems. But as empowering as these thoughtful gameplay and UI changes are, they wouldn't mean much if the presentation and story hadn't been given the same attention. Thankfully, they have. And the result is a remake that not only plays better, but it also looks and feels richer in every scene. The first thing you'll notice is a new dithering effect across the screen, which, if you're the type that plays games up close on a monitor, kinda makes the game look and feel like it's being projected on a canvas. When replaying the original, art director Hiroshi Minagawa reflected on how striking Final Fantasy Tactics looked on CRTs, and noted how difficult that is to replicate on modern LCDs. A simple scanline filter was considered, but ultimately dismissed since it can cause eye strain, which is why we all moved away from CRTs in the first place. Instead, the team developed this dithering approach to mimic the warmth and texture of CRTs, while still letting the original sprite art and textures shine through. Minagawa didn't stop there though. With modern lighting tools, he re-examined key scenes, adding subtle adjustments so they'd respond better to light. The result is that scenes now shift in tone in a way that reinforces the mood of the scene without losing the authenticity of the original visuals. Cutscenes also introduce a subtle focus effect, which sharpens whoever's speaking while blurring what's around them, which adds a sense of depth that wasn't there before. It's important to note that this isn't a tilt shift effect. The goal isn't to make the sprites look like miniatures on a board. Instead, it works on a subtle level, nudging your subconscious to treat these moments as something real that's unfolding, making you see the characters less like sprites on a grid and more like people in a scene, all without changing the game's stylized art style. That said, if you prefer the classic presentation, you can always turn it off in the options. But perhaps the most meaningful change is in how the story itself is delivered. In the original, portraits were completely static, leaving the text to do all the heavy lifting. In the Ivalice Chronicles, those portraits finally animate with mouth movements, paired with full voice acting that gives each scene more life and weight. And the voice acting is absolutely superb.
Delita, what do you suppose this is about? I could hazard a guess.
To make this work, the dialogue itself has been carefully rewritten, trimmed, and reordered, so it flows naturally when spoken and better reflects what the characters are thinking in the moment. The result is a cast that feels more distinct than ever, with dialogue that gives each character their own identity, which is no small feat in a fully voice-acted game with a cast this large. And at the center of it all is Yasumi Matsuno, the game's original director and writer, who personally returned to do the rewrites himself. He's mentioned that he's learned a lot about writing since the original, and you can hear it in how much sharper, more character-driven, and more natural the dialogue feels today. The end result is a story that still feels the same at its core, but shines brighter, thanks to how much Matsuno has grown as a writer. And it's that story that forms the core of the whole experience, something that JRPG fans like myself value deeply. On its surface, it's a tale of political intrigue, noble houses scheming, a shadowy organization pulling the strings, and a war tearing Ivalice apart. But underneath, it's a deeply human drama about ambition, betrayal, loyalty, and loss. Ramza Beov, a man seemingly erased from history, yet placed in your hands, struggles to hold onto his ideals as everyone around him makes compromises. Delita Hyrule, once his closest friend, takes a darker path after tragedy. And through it all, the War of the Lions isn't just a stage. It's the pressure that exposes who these people really are. It's this tension between power and humanity that makes Final Fantasy Tactics as moving today as it was decades ago. I should also mention that, given the game's themes, it can't help but echo some of the things happening in today's world. But rather than spelling that out, I'd rather leave that for you to discover, because as they say, experience is one of life's greatest teachers. And I know it might seem odd to bring this up right after talking about the story's emotional weight, but this feels like the best place to mention what I think might be the most important addition to the Ivalice Chronicles, the Chronicles themselves. I should note that this feature was in the original, but here, it's been expanded into a full knowledge base. On the surface, they serve as a hub for tutorials and reference material, but in practice, there's so much more. They provide a living record of the story so far, the characters you've met, and the events that shape Ivalice, which prove to be a valuable resource should you ever step away for weeks or months, which ensures that you'll know exactly where you left off when you get back. It's a feature that doesn't just solve one of RPG's biggest frustrations. It also makes the world feel richer, denser, and more lived in. Yes, it can be overwhelming at first with just how much detail it contains, but that's not a flaw of the system. It's a reflection of how deep this game truly is, that was already staggering back in the 90s, when Final Fantasy Tactics became only the second Final Fantasy on the PlayStation. And that's really the bigger picture the Chronicles highlight. Beneath all the gameplay, systems, and history, Final Fantasy Tactics endures because of how human it feels. Despite its political lean, and the expectation that political stories can feel dry or distant, this is a tale that brings everything down to the human level. People wrestling with ambition, making compromises they never thought they'd make, losing trust in friends they once relied on, and holding on to the friendships and relationships that carry them through uncertainty. That humanity was always there, but in the original, it was framed through the design choices of its time. Choices that added depth, but sometimes made it harder to notice. And now, with the Ivalice Chronicles, everything shines brighter than ever. So if you've never played the original Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles is your moment. And if you have, this is the best way to return to Ivalice.